Welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast, your home for weekly information and inspiration to help you get the graduate job of your dreams.
Hello and welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast with your host, James Curran. The Graduate Job Podcast is your weekly home for all things related to helping you on your journey to finding that amazing job. Each week I bring together the best minds in the industry, speaking to leading authors, entrepreneurs, coaches and bloggers who bring decades of experience into a bite-sized weekly 30-minute show. Put simply, this is the show I wish I had a decade ago when I graduated. In episode 37 of the Graduate Job Podcast, by popular request, we cover the thorny topic of graduate assessment centres, as I speak with career coach and assessment centre expert Kath Houston. We delve into what assessment centres are and what companies are looking for from them, through to how you can stand out in the group exercises, presentations and job interviews. If you've applied or are thinking of applying for any graduate job with any company, large or small, then this is going to be an episode you won't want to miss. As always, all links to everything we discuss and a full transcript available in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/AC. Before we start though, a quick request from me. In order for me to create a show which best serves your needs, I set up a super simple and very quick survey. It's got 5 questions and it will take you a minute to answer. So please check it out at graduatejobpodcast.com/survey. I look forward to hearing all your thoughts, but in the meantime, let's crack on with the show.
Very excited today to welcome Kath Houston to the show. Kath is a senior lecturer in employability and enterprise at the University of Central Lancashire, freelance career coach and co-author of the excellent new book, How to Succeed at Assessment Centres. Kath, welcome to the Graduate Job Podcast.
Hi James, nice to be here.
And today we're going to cover all things assessment centre related. But before we do, would you like to tell us briefly a little bit more about your career and how you came to be a lecturer, career coach and author?
When I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I went to see a careers advisor, which was quite sweet really. And I spoke to a careers advisor, a very good careers advisor, and amongst the things that we discussed, one of the careers that I was most interested in was being a careers advisor myself. And so I eventually trained and became a careers advisor, worked for a few years, then had quite a long career break because I had quite a lot of children, and then came back to careers advisory work and started being more interested in the university sector, having worked in schools and colleges, and sort of moved into working as a careers advisor in universities, and then applying for jobs as a lecturer so that I could actually teach career management and employability within courses, so across the board, different courses that people might study, make sure that they actually have the skills and knowledge to be ready for the job market, so that they don't just come out with a degree and suddenly think, what now, to actually help them in those next steps. And sort of became fascinated by the job market and how graduates are put through what often seems an assault course of different activities and different expectations of them, and how unprepared they would often be for that. So I came to suddenly be a career coach, be a careers advisor, but also really, really interested in the kind of things employers expect of graduates, particularly new graduates, and really wanted to know more than was out there. I wanted to know some of the mystery that was about assessment centres, and I wanted to find out an awful lot more.
Excellent. And today, hopefully, we can remove some of that mystery as we move into the middle of the milk round graduate recruitment season, with lots of assessment centres be kicking off in the new year. So starting at the beginning then, what is an assessment centre and why do companies use them?
Well, the fact is that interviews alone was always the only way that a recruiter would check whether a particular candidate was the right person for the job. So in the past, most people would go for an interview and they would either be selected or not. And what occupational psychologists found out and tell us is that an interview is a very imperfect way of deciding the right person for the job. What might be a half an hour conversation, as good as that can be, on its own would never be good enough. The idea of assessment centres was a way to see someone for a longer period of time, see them in a number of situations, and see whether there was some consistency in the way this person presented themselves. And it was discovered that by doing a number of activities over a half day or a day, where a candidate would be assessed and observed, recruiters would get a much, it's a boring phrase, but a more holistic picture of a candidate. So from the recruiter's point of view, it was a great opportunity, an assessment centre process, to really see someone as really as possible in what is a very artificial situation. And there's no getting away from that. It is artificial, but they do get to see each candidate in a number of different exercises, and then they can collate the statistics, the data they get from all those different situations or exercises, and decide this particular applicant, this particular candidate matches what we want. The assessment centre itself is set up so that the competencies the recruiter is looking for are mirrored in each exercise. So each exercise is designed so that a particular competency might be demonstrated or not. So an assessment centre process is in many ways a fairer process, a fairer way of assessing candidates. But there are always other things going on. Obviously, there's the objective part of it where they're looking for particular competencies. But obviously, the assessors, the observers are human beings who pick up lots of non-verbal signs and make subjective impressions of candidates. So that's an additional dynamic that's in there.
And the assessment aspect can be a really strange one the first time you go through an assessment centre, when you suddenly realise that you've got people who are just sat there with a pen and a notepad just watching you and writing down the things you do.
I think that particularly is the biggest surprise. And one of the things that I did was actually, as a candidate, go through some assessment centre processes myself. And even though I knew and thought I understood it, going through it is a whole different thing. And you're absolutely right. When you see someone standing with a clipboard, watching you with full attention on you and you only, in, say, a group exercise, in a group discussion, and see them writing notes about you, you feel, and I put it in the book, like a bug in a jar, as if some small child is peering at you with intensity. And that is both a compliment, actually, that they want to attend to you that much, but also quite unnerving. And it really is a particularly specifically challenging part of the assessment centre process.
And as you say, it's not often that you get someone's full attention just watching really what you're doing the entire time. It's just something that doesn't happen in day-to-day life.
Yeah, and some people might actually, there are some people who thrive on that, who actually like being the centre of attention all the time, but it is full on, and it may be for a half day or a full day, it might be for 2 days. That is a lot more than most people would normally expect. So it is a specific part of the process.
And thinking then about those assessors, what is it exactly that they'll be looking for and assessing you on?
Well, I mentioned competencies. If it's a well-run, well-designed assessment centre, there will be a job role profile of some kind, and within that job role profile will be skills, knowledge, competencies that are required to do that job well. Normally, that job role profile is based on a previously successful candidate who ended up as a successful employee for that company. So someone, they're perfect candidate. The competencies, the skills and knowledge, those type of things are what they're looking for. And on their clipboard, they will have a sheet with a checklist, and a checklist with very specific competence. So it might be, in a group exercise, it might be asking open questions. So if you're in a group exercise and you ask really good open questions that drive the discussion and help the group work collaboratively, those open questions are considered a positive indicator. A negative indicator might be someone interrupts someone. So they'll have a list of competencies or skills on their clipboard, and they will be looking out for them, the pluses and the minuses. And that's what they're ticking. Or they'll be writing little commentary about things that you as a candidate will have done that are good or bad. So yeah, it's a very intense process, but it's actually at the end of it, when they score that, the positives or negatives, your score can be then compared against someone else's, and that makes for more objectivity, they believe.
Excellent, and we'll cover group exercises in more detail later on in the show. And I liked in your book how you split down, you had the stats for just how common each aspect of the assessment centre was. So I think from the top 100 graduate recruiters, that 79% of them actually did use group exercises in an assessment centre, and 72% used presentations. What else?
Those statistics are for those big top graduate recruiters, as you mentioned. But what was also interesting was that when I was talking to the small and medium-sized type employers, increasingly they're copying the larger employers. They've realised that they need another look at people beyond just an interview. So I want to say that it's highly likely that whatever company a graduate applies to, a group exercise might be part of it, and a presentation,
So starting then with group exercises, what type of exercises can people expect?
Well, the most common ones, I think, most people will see it as just a discussion. So they might be given a topic to discuss. One of the ones in my book, as an example, they might have a contentious topic. It might be big business is unethical. It might be a topic like name the 10 most influential people in the world today. It could be a statement or a topic, and they're asked to discuss it as a group. It might be a group of 6 typically, and come to some consensus, and then perhaps at the end of it present their views, their group views. So that's one type of thing. Also, you might have an actual, what you might call a case study. So there might be a sheet of paper in front of you in the group. Each person has a sheet of paper with a problem or a scenario or a case with data to consider, to take in, and then the group to discuss as to a way forward, a solution, some proposals. So that could be what you might call a case study discussion. You might have an ethical, increasingly I'm noticing more an ethical question that might have a legal aspect to it and might have something to do with compliance to particular legislation or to a values base that is yours, hopefully, and potentially that company's or organisations. So it might be something to do with corporate social responsibility. It might be just something to do with how you would approach a particular situation. So these sort of ethical situations, there might be a challenge. So many people have heard of these where you might have to build a tower. So there's more physical challenges, but there are also mental challenges. They tend to break down into those main areas. You might also have like an icebreaker group exercise when at the beginning, which is more light-hearted, but again, they're almost always you as a group discussing, deciding, collaborating, negotiating, and coming up with a proposal or an opinion at the end. So getting to know people very quickly and working together very quickly with a bunch of strangers, basically.
Having been an assessor at graduate recruitment events, it was the group exercise was always my favourite. It's really enjoyable just seeing a group of 6 people who don't really know each other in a time-pressured, generally pressurised environment, and just seeing how people interact. You can really see the full range of different emotions as people, especially as the clock starts ticking, and it is like a mini version of The Apprentice each time you see one.
I mean, I think this, James, is one of the aspects that I think people don't realise, that in our mindset we have almost memories, they're not quite memories, of apprentice type situations, of I particularly think picking teams in the playground, situations where some people were picked and some people weren't, of reality TV, so-and-so got voted off, and all these metaphors are sort of simmering away in our mind, and assessment centres play into a lot of those metaphors. And that's why people get more anxious, because these sort of vague memories of these other things are actually triggering a bad vibe almost, which we don't necessarily want, but they are part of what's happening for each individual, all those types of memories.
And I'd like to cover sort of mindset maybe later on in the interview, but one difference between assessment centres and all those things you mentioned is, having spoken to a load of graduate recruiters, I know from the company when we were recruiting, if there's 6 candidates and they're all 6 great, then we'll make 6 offers. Yeah. So it's not, it's an important mindset change for people to make, is that it's not a competition. It's you're there to help bring out the best in other people. And if you do that, then you'll succeed and they'll succeed, and you'll all get the job together.
That's exactly it. But what I'm saying is people have this other mindset, and they have to change that mindset to realize that you are collaborating with other people so that you can all potentially be successful. Exactly that you're not in competition with them, but unfortunately those sort of reality TV type programs are sort of playing in the background of people's minds. It feels like that, but it isn't. And that's one of the great myths that we do need to bust, really.
I love your comment, though, in the book, that one thing about group exercises is that you have to perform. I mean, it was always frustrating when I'd see a good candidate coming in, and then the group exercise would go, and you just see them, and they wouldn't speak. And you think, how can I give you any marks for any of the different different aspects if you're not speaking?
Yeah,
you have to show your skills on the day.
And unfortunately, again, to me, this is somewhat a British thing. We're frightened of showing off, and I talk about this. You have to be there to show off what you have. You have to make it easy for them to pick you. You can't expect them to read your mind and know that you're the right person. You have to show off. So you have to be switched on, and you have to be ready to perform in an authentic way, which is the part that people go, how can I perform and be authentic? But there is a way to be yourself, to show off what you think they need to know about you. You're selecting that for them so that they can get you, and see you. But you're absolutely right. If someone is not showing that, they're not giving anyone enough reason to score them well. Yeah.
So what particular aspects are assessors looking for, and how can people stand out from the crowd?
Well, if we're still talking about group exercises, there are things people can do which I think really, as an assessor myself, you'll notice. Things like saying at the beginning, whatever the time duration is just saying, let's introduce ourselves, and literally writing people's names down. And then when you ask a question or direct something towards someone, you can say, hey, James, what do you think about this? So that's a natural human thing where if we remember people's names, we bring them on side and we're interacting well. So one is that. Secondly, to be the person who says, who's going to watch the time, or shall I watch the time? Because often the time bit is the biggest problem. And so actually saying, I'll watch the time, and be the person who says, we need to move on, we've only got 10 minutes left or something. So that sort of shows leadership. They're not looking for someone who just bamboozles everybody and pushes their way into things, but someone who shows a leadership quality, but also shows the ability to humanly interact with other people in a warm way. So warm leadership, asking great questions, really listening and feeding back what other people have said, agreeing, affirming other people. These are the type of things that are the positive indicators they'll be looking for, the ones that will get them, ticking boxes on their check sheets.
Definitely, because ultimately the assessors are probably going to be the people who will be working with you. So ultimately they want people who they want to work with. So they want people who are friendly and positive and complimentary and bringing other people in, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and that likability factor is a very difficult one to quantify, but it comes up over and over again. Some people have that they show that likability, and it is in that warmth and that sort of looking each person in the eye, giving eye contact, gently helping other people be good is the way that you'll look good yourself.
And also another top tip is to make sure you read the brief properly, because it's so easy. The instinct is you get given something and it's like, right, come on, let's do it. And so often you see groups just go off on a tangent and they'd miss the one key phrase, or one key word, or what they actually need to do to deliver by the end of the hour or the time period. And if you can be the person who takes a step back and says, actually guys, maybe we need to consider this particular aspect, or we've not considered this, or who's going to do the report, and you can bring the structure, whether it's a timekeeping or just keeping people on track, then it really helps you to stand out.
No, absolutely. And also, if there are strange words in the case study or the brief, actually saying, what do we think this means, this phrase, really getting some definitions. Do you think they mean this? So that you get some clarity at the beginning, again, so that you don't go off on tangents. So if there's a strange phrase, one of the case studies in my book, there was a one that said a fidelity clause, and understanding it wasn't a legal one, it wasn't a legal case study, but they'd used this term fidelity clause in the case study. So what do you think they mean by fidelity clause? Let's get clear about that before we move on. Definitely.
It's just having the confidence to be able to speak, really, and to ask questions, and not to think that they're silly questions, because I'm sure other people will be thinking it, but it shows you've got the confidence to put yourself forward.
Definitely. Yeah, no, definitely.
So turning that around then, what would be some of the common pitfalls that people need to avoid?
Well, in group exercises particularly, would you say? Yeah. In group exercises, the things I would say is too many closed questions. Ones which just generate a yes or a no. So if you're asking questions, there are reasons for some closed questions when you want clarity. Do you think they mean this or this? That's fine. But one of the pitfalls is too many closed questions. The second pitfall, I think, is not leaving it too late before you make a contribution. It's good to listen, but try and use questions when you don't have something to say. If you don't have something to say yet, then at least ask a question. Sort of get started, get into the discussion. Worst thing is interrupting someone, not letting them finish what they're saying, obviously. The worst thing would be to be dismissive of someone else's suggestion. Even if you don't agree with it, it's a really good idea to take a vote. Take a vote at the end. How many of us agree with this, and how many of us go with this? But to be dismissive, interrupt, those are the two worst things. But to not say anything at all until the last 3 minutes or something, would also suggest that you were slow in your thinking, which is the last thing you want to do.
That's a really good point. And you can almost see the pressure building up inside people that they want to speak, but have left it a bit long now, and
then it becomes harder. Yeah, exactly.
Some really great advice there for group exercises. I know that they are something which people find daunting, because it's not something that they've often done before. But moving on then to the next key aspect of assessment centres, which is presentations, which you mentioned are used in 72% of assessment centres. And also, I like in your book how you mention how research shows that public speaking is people's number one fear over anything else.
Over death. Fear of death is below fear of public speaking. It's extraordinary, yes.
So why do you think this is the case, and what can people do about it in an assessment centre to perform at their best?
I'm not going to apologise for the fact that a lot of what is going on in assessment centres and in my book is about psychology, and so fears of humiliation, failure, being the only one standing up there, sort of fear of loneliness, rejection. These are primal fears, these are deep fears. And when you're talking about a presentation, it's a package of all the worst fears that we could imagine. Now, the fact is, most students, most people these days, even in school, have to deliver presentations either on their own or in teams. So it's less strange that it might have been 10, 15 years ago. But the fact is, there's a difference. So you might have done them to co-students, you might have done them even in a part-time job, you might have occasionally had to do a presentation. But the pressure is cranked up because of the importance of the assessment centre in helping you gain the first graduate role perhaps that you want to get. So there's a whole bunch of things going on here. You mentioned the 72%. Again, this is the top employers, but again, when I was talking to small and medium-sized employers, almost all of them were using at least an interview and a presentation for their assessment process. So it's very, very common. This is something most graduates will have to do. So there's as I say, there's lots and lots of things going on, but it is a very good way of seeing another aspect of the candidate. So I can see why, for many jobs, they will have a presentation as part of it. But it will only be really if in that job role at some point you might have to do presentations. It's very much job specific. So there may be job roles where you would never have to do a presentation, and if that's the case, you might not have to do a presentation as part of the assessment centre.
And what sort of presentations can a candidate be expected to make? Do they tend to be to the group or just on a one-to-one basis?
Well, there's a horrible range actually, but they can be, as I mentioned in the book, it could be your centre letter and it says you'll be expected to present on this topic, and the topic will often be related to the job role, related to that organisation. And so therefore you would be able to research what you want to say ahead of the presentation. You might not be told you're going to have to deliver a presentation, and this is what surprised me when I was talking to particularly some small and medium-sized employers. They just said, when the person turned up, they said, oh, before your interview you're going to have to do a presentation, you've got half an hour to prepare something. And to me that was pretty mean, but that's what could happen. The types of presentations, as I say, topic-wise, 5-10 minutes more often than not on a given topic, dependent on the business. It could be a business topic, a finance topic, it could be a media topic. Or I mentioned one of the graduates I spoke to was going for a company that was for the food PR business, and he was just asked to do a presentation on a particular food product, and he just had to think of one and deliver a 10-minute presentation. Now that, in that particular case, was to the company. So he was the only candidate on the day coming for an interview, had to have a presentation. They got the group of the company. The company employed about 12 people. Those 12 people sat there and he delivered a presentation to them. That is, high pressure.
Pressure's on, yeah.
Yeah. Often it can be to other candidates. Sometimes it's just to a panel. It's very variable.
I think I was trying to think what I'd prefer, whether it was just you get a couple of weeks to prepare one, or you just told in the morning. I mean, there's pros and cons. At least you're not worrying about it for 2 weeks. Or
I think it rather depends on your personality as well. If you're someone who has delivered lots of presentations, and some people actually enjoy delivering presentations. When I teach a presentation sort of short course, and I often say at the beginning, how many people here like, and if it's normally, I don't know, 2 out of 10 people will say, actually, I quite like it. Some people do like standing up there, perhaps because they've done some public speaking, perhaps they've been a rugby team captain and they've had to do a speech at the end of the match. Some people have got used to them, actually enjoy them, and those kind of people, I think, would probably fare better in that sort of surprise presentation situation.
I know that when the company where I was assessing, we asked people to prepare a presentation in advance, and they had a couple of weeks to do so. As a result, the expectations were really high in terms of what you expected the people to come in and present to. You wanted it in the branding of the company that while I was working, you wanted them to have really done the research, which would look really slick and good. There was no excuses for people who sort of, I've forgotten it, or I've been really busy with uni work. It didn't matter. You expected a high standard of presentation.
Yeah, of course you would, and you'd really expect, what I think is, you'd expect more than a little website research. You'd expect some much more in-depth research. You'd expect someone to have read the business pages, picked up stories, picked up new innovations of that company, something more surprising than just regurgitating what was on the website or what any sort of 16-year-old for a school project could find out. There's much more expectation in that situation.
Yeah, and definitely. And if you are bringing a presentation in, just make sure you cover all the bases. Have printed paper copies in colour on nice paper. Have one on a memory stick. Have one on a CD. Just in case there's power cuts or someone's laptop's not working. Just make sure you're well prepared for
Absolutely, you do. And actually, preparing to do it naked, which is what I would call without any technology and without, with no help, not without any clothes on, but we're so used to having the technology to help us. If you can do it with no props, no technology, then if you know it backwards, if you know every detail and that you can put it across in an engaging way, then if anything goes wrong, you're ready for it.
Although presenting with no clothes on would certainly make you stand out to the assessor.
And I do think standing out, you've said it yourself, how you make yourself stand out, whether it's in the group exercises or the interviews or the presentations, it's what it's about. But yes, not wearing any clothes is not something I'd recommend. No.
So thinking then about the presentations where the on-the-spot ones and you've got 10 minutes to think of something, what advice would you give people in that situation so they can structure their thoughts and give a good presentation?
Well, I think I try and say this all the way through, and it's about critical thinking and it's about creative thinking as well, but it is about thinking expansively. So we often, if you're given someone a topic, a very sort of small, limited topic, your mind often goes in a straight line. Oh, they want something like this, this and this. When in fact, before you do that, it would be much better to do a sort of a mind map sort of approach. Think, what else could this be about? And what else? And what else? Keep asking yourself, what else? What else could I throw in? What else could I try? So that you just keep asking yourself those what else questions, and very quickly mind map some ideas with little bubbles. Not a sophisticated mind map, but just something that sort of gets your brain buzzing and bouncing off on other ideas. So just think, what are the different things that could come into play here? You might even do sort of things like, that on business courses, they talk about a pestle analysis, thinking politically, economically, working through a mnemonic like that, or some way to just spread out your thoughts on a piece of paper, first of all, about that topic. And then, for me, what I think is pick a surprising aspect, something that is a little bit different. Think of something a surprising statistic that you might have heard of, or something not a lot of people would know, and think about where you might place that in your presentation. It may well be at the beginning to draw the audience in, the surprise. It might be in the middle when people's attention is starting to fall, perhaps. But decide where you're going to put that surprising nugget, if you can find something like that. It depends whether they give you any resources at the time. You may be doing something on your phone, doing some quick searches on your phone, if that's allowable. But you may just be doing it from your brain, from your knowledge, from your ideas. It may be that you saw a story in the paper the day before about something. You're just trying to link into as many different possibilities as possible. And then you're going to say, I've got 10 minutes, I can only make 3 or 4 key points. What are my 3 or 4 key points? And decide those 3 or 4 key points. So you might say, here's my surprise, here are my 3 or 4 key points, here's how I'm going to bring this to an end. And as I mentioned, if there's some kind of artifact you could use, artifact means an object. If you've got in your bag or with you a lemon, it could be anything that you could hold up and use as an object that makes people think, what's that person going to do with that? And that's going to be surprising as well, and that's going to make it engaging. So you yourself, if you've watched presentations, James, you know how boring it is most of the time, how one presentation after another, and that's what often happens. You might have 6 candidates, one after another. Why does someone stand out? Because they're not just standing there going, I'm going to do this, and now I'm going to do this, and so they've done something different with the content. They've played around with it, and yes, their delivery would be really, really important, but they've really created some really good content, and it could be off the top of their head, as you say. In a surprise situation, you've just got to use what you've got.
That's a really good point. And as you talk about in the book, you've got to think about what is it that the employer is trying to get out of each of the exercises. And say in this example of you've got 10 minutes to prepare a presentation, they're not looking for you to be an expert on the subject, whichever random subject it might be. They're looking to put you under time pressure and to see how you can handle that time pressure of a very short period of time to research, to structure your thoughts, and then to speak about it. So it's less about the subject you're talking on, it's about the confidence you're bringing, the enthusiasm you're bringing. Are you able to hold the audience? Are you able to, as you mentioned, Kath, structure it into, I've got 3 points I'm going to cover. And also, as one of the employers in your book mentioned, if you've got a 10-minute presentation, make sure you finish 9 minutes in and then ask for any questions. Don't just be rambling away and going over your time. Make sure you hit whatever brief it is.
I think that's it. Always thinking, why has the employer chosen this exercise? What are they trying to find out? Exactly what you're saying. So if they've done a surprise presentation, they don't expect you necessarily to be an expert on that topic. You're absolutely right. But they want to see whether you can think on your feet, how you respond to a challenge, a time challenge like that. Exactly. So bear that in mind. Whatever exercise they throw at you, what are they trying to get at here? What will they want to see? What are they looking for? You can normally second guess these things. You can normally second guess what are they wanting from this.
Excellent. So moving on then to the interview, which unfortunately is what everyone's going to face at an assessment centre, big company or small company. But what sort of interview will graduates most likely face, Kath? Is it going to be one-to-one, more of a panel interview?
Well, what it would seem is on a fairly typical standard assessment centre, someone might have an individual interview and a panel interview. More often than not, they trust a panel interview because there are more people assessing that candidate, but you may well have both. You might have a telephone interview early on in the stage, an individual interview, and then a panel interview. Someone I've just spoken to recently has gone through quite a long process and felt like she'd had 3 separate interviews, and now she's got a final interview with a partner, which will, so to speak, seal the deal, will make the final decision. So interviews can be, at any stage in the process and of various kinds, really.
And what would you say is the best way that people can begin to prepare for the interviews to make sure that they're going to give their best?
Well, it's the same with everything, and it's boring to say it, but research shows whether you're in the interview or not, whether it's the presentation or the group exercises, your research into that organisation and what they're about, and trying to understand that they have something precious, which is their company or organisation, and they want to give it into the hands of someone who respects it and really wants to work there. Now, the fact of the matter is most graduates are applying for lots of different companies, and yet they've still got to act as if that company, when they're there that day, is the focus of their attention. So the research really, really shows. And as I mentioned before, it isn't just the standard research. You've got to see this like each company or organisation, like a project in its own right, and try and find out way more than a surface search would give you. So that's one big part of it. But the other part is, as I mentioned before, you can second guess the questions they will ask. You can second guess the questions because they tell you about the competencies they're looking for, the skills they're looking for. That's normally very easily available. And if you were interviewing yourself for that job, if you thought of it that way, what questions would you need to ask to decide whether you had the competencies? If you think about it in that way, you should be able to second guess what questions will come up.
That's a really good point. And for every company that you apply to, especially the larger ones, on their website, they've got, these are our 7 core values, or, these are the even explicitly say, these are the competencies that we're looking for, whether it's, teamwork, critical thinking, or whatever it might be. So that if they've got 7 core values, you're probably going to get at least one question on each of those values.
Exactly. So it's not as mysterious as it seems. I mean, there often are the odd. I mean, I talked about quirky questions, the surprise questions, but 90% of the questions you're going to be asked in an interview, you can prepare for. You can think, what would I say in answer to that? What example will I give for that? And so you have the chance to prepare, research the company, know what they're looking for, and actually not feed them back parrot-like answers, feed them back genuinely convincing examples of the thing they say they're looking for.
Yep, and that's a really good point. And even if you are interviewing for 10 different companies and this is your 10th interview of the week, you've got to make sure that you're delivering each answer fresh, as if it's the first time you've ever told it, just to make sure it's interesting for the person listening.
That's why I do recommend having quite a large bank of examples that you can sort of select for different organisations. And so you might have 4 examples of communication skills, 4 examples of dealing with a difficult situation. It's useful to have a large bank of examples. Most of us, if we really think about it, can think of times when we've had to negotiate, times when we've had to lead other people, times when we've had to collaborate. There ought to be plenty of examples that you could have, and it's really worth having these examples on some sort of spreadsheet as memory joggers that you can look and think, I'm going to use those 3 when they ask me about that, so that you've got some, as you say, fresh examples, and that you're not overusing one particular example and sounding a bit tired when you sort of pull out this example that you've used several times before.
No, that's a really good point. And you describe in the book about the chunk approach to interviews. Could you describe what this is?
In terms of questions, what I find with people is they don't know how much to say. And sometimes they say just 1 sentence answers, and sometimes they ramble and it's way, way too long. And so what's helped when I've done interview coaching with people is to say whatever question they ask, particularly the general questions, think about what 3 things can I say, or 3 or 4 things can I say. So if they say, why do you want to work here? 3 or 4 reasons. If they say, what can you offer us? 3 or 4 key skills or abilities you've got. And I say, prepare in your mind these 3 or 4 chunks, and make sure that the final chunk, before you say it, that you say something like, and finally, or lastly, so that they know you're coming to an end and you know you're coming to an end. And that sort of gives it a bit of structure. And it actually, when people practice it, when they try and do it, they go, well, that was really easy. I can do that. And it's not about learning what you want to say off by heart. It's just thinking, when they ask me, why do you want to work here? I'm going to say this point, and this point. And you don't have to say it the same way each time, but the content would be the same. So it just gives you a little bit of, as you say, freshness, but you know in your mind that's what I'm going to say. Those are the key points I want to make for that. So the chunking it just makes it easier for anyone to remember and deliver it in a compelling sort of way.
And another tool which I saw in the book, which I'd not come across before, was the Swerve acronym. Again, could you fill us in on what this is?
Well, I made this up, and I made it entirely up because I had come across quite a few people who'd had these, and it's all over the place. You can read about it. These very strange questions that are seemingly unanswerable, and I just thought it would be helpful to have something that could help you remember how to deal with it. So I made this word up partly because you are trying to swerve away from taking the whole weird, wacky question over seriously, because the question itself won't have an answer. So if they ask you how many ice cubes would fill a London bus, nobody's ever done that probably, and there is no exact answer. But what they want to know is how you would work that out. So Swerve is about just finding a way to answer that question. So in the situation, the S is for the situational scenario. You literally rephrase the scenario or situation they've given to you, whatever that is. And then you say what you see as the problem. So if it is the how many ice cubes in a London bus, the problem is at one level, do you mean when they're still frozen or when they're starting to melt? You could start sort of talking about what you see the problem is. The problem is how many crevices there are on a London bus or whatever. You start talking about the problem. And then you start to explain your thinking. Well, I'm thinking this way. This is what I'm thinking, how I'd go about it. And this is the reasons I'd go about it in this way. And that's the R. So we've got the S, the situation, the W, what, define the problem. E, explain your thinking. R, your reasons for your thinking. And then sort of value your suggestions. So whatever you've said, the way you're going to go about measuring this or deciding this, how you value it. You might say something like, I think that's a reasonable way to go about this. And then you say, so finally my decision would be this. I'd work on this number or I'd decide this. So Swerve is just a mnemonic, which some people might find helpful, but the most important thing to me is to say there isn't an exact answer to this. I've got to show my thinking how I'd go about it. So a very famous one, which has been overused, which was a silly question, which was, and most people have heard of now, is a Jaffa cake a biscuit or a cake? And most people would go into all sorts of complicated things about the ingredients and things like this. One graduate I spoke to just said it's about which aisle it's on in the supermarket. If it's on the cake aisle, it's a cake. If it's on the biscuit. Now, he didn't come up at that just off the top of his head. He did some thinking. He showed his thinking. He was thinking, well, you know, what do we know about Jaffa cakes? And he was actually talking through his thinking, explaining his reasons, and then coming out with his final decision. Now, that wasn't the right decision. It's just a decision, and that's what these weird questions are about, showing your decision-making, showing your thinking on your feet again, showing how you respond to something that's a bit wacky.
Excellent. The Swerve methodology, you heard it here first. Kath, that's one for you to get trademarked.
Worth reading the book for the proper explanation, perhaps.
No, definitely. And I know that, I can remember one job I applied for, the question I got, which completely threw me at the time, was how much money does the average London taxi driver make? And yeah, I wish I'd had that mnemonic to help me with my thinking.
Good.
So thinking then at the end of the interview, what are some great questions that applicants can ask the interviewer when they get the inevitable question of, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me?
Well, it's interesting because I've sat on interview panels, and I sat on an interview panel a few years ago, and one of the applicants asked, when they were asked to ask any questions, why do you like working here? And one of the people on the panel that I was with looked quite thrown by this question. It was actually quite an awkward moment. But generally, I do think it's worth saying, what is it about this company that you like? How long have you been with this company, and what do you like about working with this company? I think that's quite a good question to ask. But there aren't any. I don't want anyone to think, oh, there's just this one question you can ask. I would encourage you to be curious. So there's a certain amount of information you can find in your research, but there might be something that you just couldn't find out, that you were curious about. You'd heard a whisper about something, and you want to ask that curious question. A good curious question, which shows you're interested in that company, fascinated by that company even, is going to help you have a good, strong finish to the interview. Those are the kind of things there are obvious ones. They're kind of almost cliche ones, like, what kind of development will I be offered in this company, things like that. But I'd actually ask a curious question, that has come out of it's a unique curious question. So if I tell you a question now and everybody goes and asks that question, then it's not going to be unique anymore. Find a unique question that you can ask that shows your interest in that company, ideally.
Just don't ask how much money you're going to get paid or how many holidays you get.
Yeah, well, it's funny because some people would say, oh, never ask that question because it makes you look like money's your goal. But it may well be that for certain job roles, they would think you were foolish not to ask that question. You know, a high financial role, they might think, why the hell hasn't he asked what the salary is? You know, so it's always a judgment call.
No, that's a really good point. And time is unfortunately running away with us, Kath. Yeah. Before we finish, I just want to touch upon, it's the final chapter in your book on peak performance. How can listeners ensure that they are walking into the assessment centre in the best frame of mind, you know, confident that they're going to get the job?
Well, simply, no one would think of deciding to run the New York or London marathon without getting into preparation. So you have to do some mental preparation in the same way as you do physical preparation for a marathon. And my best advice here is to literally do some mindfulness, some what we call cognitive rehearsal, preparing in your mind the way you want things to go. So in your mind, seeing it going well, seeing yourself performing well, seeing yourself as being authentic and convincing. And that takes some time. That means that you might have to each day sort of take 5 minutes relaxation and actually run like a little film in your mind of how you want things to go. And there's some exercises in the book that help people do that. But that sort of cognitive rehearsal, which is preparing your thinking, is used by athletes and a whole range of performers and has been found to be psychologically a very effective way to prepare for what is the challenge of an assessment centre. So the sort of cognitive tricks, I call them, about helping work on your thinking, work on your expectations, changing your thinking practices from what might be a negative thinking, things are going to go wrong, to I'm going to be myself, I'm going to perform to my best, that kind of thing. Just changing those thinking, changing your mental scripts really, will really make a difference.
Definitely, and just to remember that you don't win a prize to be invited to an assessment centre. You're there because the company thinks that you can do the job, and for them to give up a day of how many people's time and the cost of getting you there, they wouldn't invite you there unless there's something about your application that they like the look of, and you would have gone through the tests and the interviews beforehand, so you're good enough to be there, you deserve to be there. So go in with confidence and believe that you can get the job. And also, it's not a competition, as we talked about earlier. If you do well and everybody else does well, then you'll all get job offers.
Yeah, and confidence is courage, really. It's about holding your nerve in a difficult situation. So don't think I haven't got confidence or I'm not very confident. Think I'm going to be courageous here. I'm going to hold my nerve, and that's a better place to sort of think, a better thinking place to be, really. Yeah.
That's super, and that's a great point for us to finish the main part of the interview on, Kath. But before we finish, let's move to our weekly staple of quick questions. So, what one book is there that you could recommend to our listeners that they should read?
Asking someone to pick a book when I'm such a fantastic... I read all the time and I love books, so it's really, really hard to ask me this. My first thought was a book I've read recently myself, which is from the School of Life series, and it's called How to Find Fulfilling Work. I love this book, a really easy book to read. I wish I'd written it myself. It's by a guy called Roman Krishnarik. But there's a second book, which is a sort of fiction book called Secret Life of Bees, which isn't at all about bees, by a woman called Sue Monk Kidd. And it's just a beautifully written book and a fantastic book about a young girl growing up. But there's a sort of quote in there which I just really, really love, and it's an older person talking to the young girl, and the little girl says, "People don't know what matters and what doesn't," and the adult says, "They know what matters, but they don't choose it. The hardest thing on earth is to choose what matters." And in terms of career and career development management, choosing what matters is what I feel my career coaching and career advisory work is about, helping people choose what matters for them. And so that's why I quite like that book as well.
Well, I love that quote. That's one I'll have to check out. But Kath has been far too modest, and I highly recommend her latest book, How to Succeed at Assessment Centres, which will be linked to in the show notes. So you'll be able to get more details about her latest book in the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com. And the next question, Kath, what one website would you recommend our listeners to check out?
I would never, I couldn't do one website. I would say there are too many really, and it has to be specific to what someone's looking for. It's much better to be specific. There are obvious ones like the Prospects website. I love the University of Kent Careers website. There are lots of really amazing ones, but I would say set up some sort of alert system to the websites that you find the most useful for your particular career direction, which might be professional websites, the LinkedIn company pages. But I quite like setting up specific Google alerts to particular job roles, or so that I don't miss anything. So I would probably recommend some sort of alert system.
That's really good advice. Google Alerts are a brilliant free tool.
Yeah, love that.
And finally, Kath, what one tip would you give our listeners that they can implement today to help on their job search?
Well, there's so much, but I think what I'd say is and it's a big point, but so many people, so many of the graduates I know are looking for the big brand employers, the big name employers. And I personally think the small and medium-sized employers have so much to offer new graduates. And I've seen so many graduates who've gone into smaller companies and have done so much and done so well, and then often been picked up later on by a big name employer, being sort of headhunted. So I would say look into the small and medium-sized sector, and then people say to me, well, how do I do that? And one starting point I would use is the Times newspaper have every year the top small, medium-sized employers who are voted for by the people who work for them. And there are some phenomenal names in there of names of companies that you might not have heard of, but would be a really great place to start in research if you were wanting to research some of these small and medium-sized employers. So my tip would be to look at those as a way to find some really interesting graduate job roles. And then sort of secondly, to really be clear about what you want. Do your research to be absolutely certain that the jobs you're applying for are roles that you really, really want, because you'll be found out otherwise. So make sure that you're really, really clear and talk to as many people as possible to get that clarity.
Brilliant advice, and definitely echo looking outside of the big milk round graduate companies, because 99% of all graduates who get employment aren't employed by the top 100 companies. So there's a wealth of other jobs out there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Kath, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure having you on the Graduate Job Podcast. Before we finish, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you and the work that you do?
Probably you can find me on Twitter at CareerKaths. I'm on LinkedIn. People can contact me easily through LinkedIn. All my contact details are on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for appearing on the Graduate Job Podcast.
Joe. Lovely.
My thanks again to Kath Houston. Slightly longer episode than usual, but we covered some great topics, and I know it's going to be really helpful to all of you who've got upcoming assessment centres. I'll keep it really brief with the takeaways. The first, and it's a key one though, is to be confident. They've seen something in your application that they like, so this is your chance to shine and impress. So walk in there believing that you can get the job. My second point is, it's not a competition. I've spoken to loads of recruiters this year, and they've all said the same thing. If you all do well, you will all get the job. So think about how you can help to bring out the best of your fellow candidates. In the group exercise, bring them into conversations. Ask the quiet candidates what they're thinking. By doing so, you will stand out as a team player, which is something all companies are looking for. And the final point is, and it's one we didn't touch upon today, but make sure you can ace the psychometric tests. Listen to episode 35 with Ben Williams, as it's packed full of great advice of what you need to do to pass the verbal and numerical tests. You're going to have to do them, so make sure you don't fall at this hurdle. So there you go, episode 37 finished. Check out the show notes at graduatejobpodcast.com/AC. And please also take my 1-minute survey at graduatejobpodcast.com/survey. If you want to get in touch and say hello, on Twitter I'm at GradJobPodcast. It'd be great to hear from you. Join us next week when I have Marielle Kelly on the show talking about how to use social media in your graduate job search. I hope you enjoyed the episode today, but more importantly, hope you use it and apply it. See you next week.